aliens or angels or fiction, that it was a form of it was a pension system instead of an intergenerational Ponzi scheme or something like that. You know, the fiction means everybody gets paid Social Security because it's a pension system. Whereas if we were more honest and said it's just a welfare system, maybe you could start dialing. You could probably rationalize in a lot of ways.
And it's not related to how much you put into it, right? Like, how does Social Security work?
It's partially. I think it's partially related. So I think there is. I'm not a total expert on this stuff, but I think there's some guaranteed minimum you get, and then if you put more in, you get somewhat more, and then it's capped at a certain amount.
And then
that's why Social Security taxes are capped at something like $150,000 a year. And then this is one of the really big tax increase proposals that's out there is to uncap it, which would effectively be a 12.4% income tax hike, on all your income.
Just to Social Security?
Sure, because the argument is the sort of progressive left Democrat argument is that it's why should you have a regressive Social Security tax? Why should you pay 12.4% or whatever the Social Security tax is? Half gets paid by you, half gets paid by your employer, but then it's capped at like 140, 150K, so some level like that. And why should it be regressive? Where if you make 500K or $1 million a year, you pay zero tax on your marginal income. And that makes no sense if it's a welfare program. If it's a retirement savings program and your payout's capped, then if you don't need to put in more than you get out.
Well, that's logical, but there's not a lot of logic going on with the way people are talking about taxes today. Like California just jacked their taxes up to 14. What was it? 14.4?
Something like that. Yeah, 14.3, I think.
Which is
maybe
hilarious.
More. Yeah, 49. Something. Yeah.
I
49.
mean, you want more money for doing a terrible job and having more people leave for the first time ever in like the history of the state.
Yeah, but it gets away with it.
I know.
And
well,
so
people are forced with no choice. What are you going to do?
It is. I mean, there are people at the margins who leave, but the state government still collects more and more in revenues. So it's you get 10% more revenues, and 5% of the people leave. You still increase the amount of revenues you're getting. It's inelastic enough that you're actually able to increase the revenues. I mean, this is sort of the crazy thing about California is, there's always sort of a right-wing or libertarian critique of California that, it's such a ridiculous place. It should just collapse under its own ridiculousness, and it doesn't quite happen. The macroeconomics are pretty good. 40 million people, the GDP's around $4 trillion. It's about the same as Germany with 80 million or Japan with 125 million. Japan has 3 times the population of California. Same GDP means 1/3 the per capita GDP. There's some level on which, California as a whole is working, even though it doesn't work from a governance point of view, doesn't work for a lot of the people who live there. And the rough model I have for how to think of California is that it's kind of like Saudi Arabia. And you have a crazy religion, wokeism in California, Wahhabism in Saudi Arabia. Not that many people believe it, but it distorts everything. And then you have like oil fields in Saudi Arabia, and you have the big tech companies in California, and the oil pays for everything. And then you have a completely bloated, inefficient government sector, and you have
I meant to do
all sorts
W.
of distortions in the real estate market, where people also make lots of money. Sort of the government and real estate are ways you redistribute the oil wealth for the big tech money in California, and it's not the way you might want to design a system from scratch, but it's pretty stable. People have been saying Saudi Arabia is ridiculous. It's going to collapse any year now. They've been saying that for 40 or 50 years. But if you have a giant oil field, you can pay for a lot of ridiculousness. I think that's the way you have to think of California.
Well, the other thing is there are
things about it that are ridiculous, but there's something about it that it doesn't naturally self-destruct overnight.
Well, there's a lot of kick-ass people there, and there's a lot of people that are still generating enormous amounts of wealth there, and it's too difficult to just pack up and leave.
Yeah, I think it's something like 4 of the 8 or 9 companies with market capitalizations over $1 trillion are based in California. So
That's amazing.
it's Google, Apple, now NVIDIA, Meta. I think Broadcom's close to that.
And there's no ideal place to live either. It's not like California sucks, so there's a place that's got it totally dialed in with also that has an enormous GDP, also has an enormous population. There's not like one big city that's really dialed in.
Well, there are things that work. So I looked at all the zero tax states in the U.S. and it's always I think the way you ask the question gets at it, which is you don't live in in theory a lot of stuff happens on a state level, but you don't live in a state, you live in a city. And so if you're somewhat biased towards living in at least a moderately sized city, I think there are 4 states where there are no cities: Alaska, Wyoming, South Dakota, New Hampshire. There's zero tax, but no cities to speak of. And then you have Washington State with Seattle, where the weather is the worst in the country. You have Nevada with Las Vegas, which I'm not that big a fan of. And then that leaves three zero tax states. You have Texas, which I like as a state, but I'm not that big a fan of Austin, Dallas, or Houston. It's a sort of Houston is just sort of an oil town, which is good if you're in that business, but otherwise not. Dallas has sort of an inferiority complex to LA and New York. Just not the healthiest attitude. And then, I don't know, Austin's a government town and a college town, and a wannabe hipster San Francisco town. So, my books are 3 strikes, and you're kind of out too. And then that leaves Nashville, Tennessee, and then or Miami, South Florida, and those would be my 2 top choices.
Miami's fun, but I wouldn't want to live there. It's a fun place to visit. It's a little too crazy, a little too chaotic, a little too cocaine fueled, a little too party.
I think it's pretty segmented from the tourist strip from everything else. It probably is. There probably is something a little bit paradoxical about any place that gets lots of tourists, where it's in some sense of the case. There's some things that are great about it because so many tourists go, but then in some sense, it creates a weird aesthetic because the day-to-day vibe is you don't work, you're just having fun or something like that.
Right, because so many people are going there just to do that.
And that's probably a little bit off with the South Florida thing, but I think it's and then I think Nashville is also sort of its own real place.
Nashville's great. Yeah.
So those are the top 2.
I could live in Nashville, no problem. Yeah.
I'm always too 5th grade onward since 77 I lived in California, and so I'm just a sucker for the weather, and I think there is no place besides coastal California where we have really good weather year-round in the U.S. Maybe Hawaii's pretty good.
Coastal California's tough to beat, and you're 2 hours from the mountains.
Man, it's like it's mid-August here in Austin. It's just brutal.
Is it?
I think so.
Really? That was too hot for you?
It was too hot.
Today's mild. What is it out there? Like 80?
All right.
85? 96? I do so much sauna that I literally don't even notice it. I'm outside for hours every day shooting arrows, and I don't even notice it.
Well, that's I don't know if you're a representative of the average Austrian
resident. I don't know, but I think you get accustomed to it. To me, it's so much better than too cold. Too cold, you can die. I know you can die, but you probably won't. Especially if you have water. You'll be okay. cold. Cold's real. So really cold places, there's 5 months out of the year where your life's in danger. Where you could do something wrong. Like if you live in Wyoming and you break down somewhere and there's no one on the road, you could die out there. That's real. You could die from exposure.
Sure, there's probably some very deep reason there's been a net migration of people to the west and the south of the U.S. over
California
the last
can
5
do no
decades.
wrong. As long as the earth doesn't move, you're good. As long as there's no tsunamis, you're good. It is a perfect environment, virtually year-round. It gets a little hot in the summer, but again, coastal, not at all. If you get an 80-degree day in Malibu, it's unusual. You know, it's wonderful.
Right.
You got a beautiful breeze coming off the ocean. Sun's out. Everybody's pretty.
And then it's correlated with confiscatory taxation. They all sort of a package deal.
Well, it's a scam. You know, they know you don't want to leave. I didn't want to leave California. It's fucking great.
I appreciate you left. I always have the fantasy that if enough people like you leave, it'll put pressure on them. But it's never quite enough.
Never quite enough, and it's not going to be. It's too difficult for most people. It was very difficult for me, and I had a bunch of people working for me that were willing to pack up and leave, like young Jamie over there. But we, you know, it was tricky. You're taking your whole business, and my business is talking to people. That's part of my business. My other business is stand-up comedy. So
you left during COVID, or
I left at the very beginning. As soon as they started locking things down, I'm like, oh, these motherfuckers.
April, May, 2020.
In May, I started looking at houses.
Cool.
That's when I came to Austin first.
I got a place in Miami in September 2020, and spent the last 4 winters there. So I'm sort of always on the cusp of moving to Florida. Hard to get out of California. But the thing that's gotten a lot harder about moving relative to 4 years ago, and you know, I'd say I think my real estate purchases have generally not been great over the years. I mean, they've done okay, but certainly not the way I've been able to make money at all. But with the one exception was Miami. Bought it in September 2020, and probably, you know, fast forward 4 years, it's up like 100%.
Wow.
Or something like that. But then paradoxically, this also means it's gotten much harder to move there or Austin or any of these places. You know, if you if I relocated my office in LA, the people who own houses, okay, you have to buy a place in Florida, costs twice as much as it did 4 years ago, and then the interest rates have also doubled. So you get a 30-year mortgage, you could have locked that in for 3% in 2020. Now it's, you know, maybe 6.5%, 7%. So the prices have doubled, the mortgages have doubled. It costs you 4 times as much to buy a house, and so so there was a moment where people moved during COVID, and it's gotten dramatically harder than what it was 4 years ago.
Well, the Austin real estate market went crazy, and then it came back down a little bit. And it's in that down a little bit spot right now, where there's a lot of like high-end properties that are still for sale. They can't move. It's different, you know. There's not a lot of people moving here now like there was in the boom, because everything's open everywhere.
Well, I somehow think Austin was linked to California, and Miami was linked a little bit more to New York. And it was a little bit, you know, all these differences, but Austin was kind of, you know, a big part of the people from tech in California that moved to Austin. You know, there's a part of the Miami, South Florida.
I tried to email it.
People
I
from
worded.
finance in
Fuck.
New York,
It's my bad.
New York City that moved to Florida, and the finance industry is less networked on New York City. So I think it is possible for people, if you run a, you know, private equity fund, or if you work at a bank, it's possible for some of those functions to easily be moved to a different state. The tech industry is crazily networked on California. Like there's probably some way to do it. It's not that easy.
Yeah, it makes sense. It makes sense too. It's just the sheer numbers. I mean, when you're talking about all those corporations that are established and based in California, there's so many. They're so big. Just the sheer numbers of human beings that live there and work there that are involved in tech.
Sure. If it wasn't as networked, you could probably just move. And maybe these things are networked till they're not. Detroit was very networked. The car industry was super networked on Detroit for decades and decades, and Michigan got more and more mismanaged, and people thought the network sort of protected them because the big 3 car companies were in Detroit, but then you had all the supply chains who were also in Detroit. And then eventually it was just so ridiculous. People moved, started moving to factories outside of that area, and it sort of unraveled. So that's, it can also happen in California. It'll just take a while.
That would be insane if they just abandoned all the tech companies in California. I mean, just look at what happened at Flint, Michigan when all the auto factories pulled out.
Well, look, I think it's always, there are all these paradoxical histories. The internet, the point of the internet, in some sense, was to eliminate the tyranny of choice. And that was sort of the idea. And then one of the paradoxes about the internet, history of the internet, was that the internet companies, were all centered in California. Then there have been different waves of how networked, how non-networked they were. I think probably 2021, sort of the COVID moving away from California. The big thing in tech was crypto, and crypto had this conceit of alternate currency, decentralized, away from the central banks, but also the crypto companies, the crypto protocols. You could do those from anywhere. You could do them outside the U.S. You could do them from Miami, and so crypto was something where the tech could naturally move out of California, and today probably the core tech narrative is completely flipped to AI. And then there's something about AI that's very centralized. I had this one-liner years ago where it was if we say that crypto is libertarian, can we also say that AI is communist, or something like this, where the natural structure for an AI company looks like it's a big company, and then somehow the AI stuff feels like it's going to be dominated by the big tech companies in the San Francisco Bay Area. And so that's the future of tech.
Yeah.
The scale, the natural scale of the industry tells you that it's going to be extremely hard to get out of the San Francisco Bay Area.
When you look to the future, when you try to just make a guess as to how all this is going to turn out with AI, what do you think we're looking at for the next 5 years?
Man, I think I should start by being modest in answering that question and saying that nobody has a clue.
Right, which is true. Which pretty much all the experts say.
I would say, let me do sort of a history. The riff I always had on this was that I can't stand any of the buzzwords, and I felt AI, there's all this big data, cloud computing. There were all these crazy buzzwords people had, and they always were ways to sort of abstract things and get away from reality somehow, and were not good ways of talking about things. And I thought AI was this incredible abstraction because it can mean the next generation of computers, it can mean the last generation of computers, it can mean anything in between. And if you think about the AI discussion in the 2010s, pre-OpenAI, ChatGPT, and the revolution of the last 2 years, but the 2010s AI discussion, maybe it was, so I'll start with the history before I get to the future. But the history of it was maybe anchored on two visions of what AI meant. One was Nick Bostrom, Oxford Prof, wrote this book, Super Intelligence, 2014. And it was basically AI was going to be this super duper intelligent thing, way godlike intelligence, way smarter than any human being. And then there was the CCP, Chinese Communist rebuttal, the Kai-Fu Lee book in 2018, AI Superpower, subtitled something like The Race for AI Between Silicon Valley and China, or something like this. And it was sort of, it defined AI as, it was fairly fairly low tech and just surveillance. Facial recognition technology. We would just have this sort of totalitarian Stalinist monster. Didn't require very much innovation, just required to apply things. And basically the subtext was China's going to win because we have no ethical qualms in China about applying this sort of basic machine learning to sort of measuring or controlling the population. And those were sort of like, say, two extreme competing visions of what AI would mean in the 2010s, and sort of maybe were sort of the anchors of the AI debate. And then what happened in some sense with ChatGPT in late 22, early 23 was that the achievement you got, you did not get super intelligence. It was not just surveillance tech, but it was you actually got to the holy grail of what people would have defined AI as from 1950 to 2010. Previous 60 years, before the 2010s, people always said AI, the definition of AI is passing the Turing test. And the Turing test, it basically means that the computer can fool you into thinking that it's a human being. And it's a somewhat fuzzy test because obviously you can have an expert on the computer, a non-expert. Does it fool you all the time, or some of the time? How good is it? But to first approximation, the Turing test, we weren't even close to passing it in 2021, and then ChatGPT basically passes the Turing test. Just for like say an IQ 100 average person.
Hi guys.
It's passed the Turing test, and that was the holy grail. That was the holy grail of AI research for the previous 60 years. And so there's probably some psychological or sociological history that can say that this weird debate between Bostrom about superintelligence and Kai-Fu Lee about surveillance tech was like this almost like psychological suppression people had, where they were not thinking, they lost track of the Turing test, of the holy grail, because it was about to happen. And it was such a significant, such an important thing that you didn't even want to think about. So I'm tempted to give almost a psychological repression theory of the 2010s debates. But be that as it may, the Turing test gets passed, and that's an extraordinary achievement. And then, maybe, and then where does it go from here? There probably are ways you can refine these. It's still going to be a long time to apply it. There's a question. There's this AGI discussion. Will we get artificial general intelligence, which is a hopelessly vague concept. General intelligence could be just a generally smart human being. So is that just a person with an IQ of 130? Or is it super intelligence? Is it godlike intelligence? So it's sort of an ambiguous thing. But I keep thinking that maybe the AGI question's less important than passing the Turing test. If we got AGI, if we got, let's say, super intelligence, that would be interesting to Mr. God, because we have competition to be God. But surely the Turing test is more important for us humans, because it's either a complement or a substitute for humans, and so it's going to rearrange the economic, cultural, political structure of our society in extremely dramatic ways. And I think maybe what's already happened is much more important than anything else that's going to be done. And then it's just going to be a long ways in applying it. One last thought. The analogy I'm always tempted to go to, these things are never, historical analogies are never perfect, but it's that maybe AI in 2023, 24 is like the internet in 1999, where on one level, it's clear the internet's going to be big and get a lot bigger, and it's going to dominate the economy. It's going to rearrange the society in the 21st century. And then at the same time, it was a complete bubble, and people had no idea how the business models worked. almost everything blew up. It took, it didn't take that long in the scheme of things. It took, 15, 20 years for it to become super dominant, but it didn't happen sort of in 18 months as people fantasized in 1999. And maybe what we have in AI is something like this. It's figuring out how to actually apply it, in sort of all these different ways is going to take something like 2 decades. But that doesn't distract from it being a really big deal.
It is a really big deal, and I think you're right about the Turing test. Do you think that the lack of acknowledgement or the public celebration, or at least this like mainstream discussion, like which I think should be everywhere, that we've passed the Turing test, do you think it's connected to the fact that this stuff accelerates so rapidly that even though we've essentially breached this new territory, we still know that GPT-5 is going to be better, GPT-6 is going to be insane, and then they're working on these right now, and the change is happening so quickly, we're almost a little reluctant to acknowledge where we're at.
Yeah, I've probably for 15 years or so, often been on the side that there isn't that much progress in science or tech, or not as much as Silicon Valley likes to claim, and even on the AI level, I think it's a massive technical achievement. It's still an open question. Is it actually going to lead to much higher living standards for everybody? The internet was a massive achievement. How much did it raise people's living standards? Much trickier question. But in this world where not much has happened, one of the paradoxes of an era of relative tech stagnation is that when something does happen, we don't even know how to process it. So I think Bitcoin was a big invention, whether it was good or bad, but it was a pretty big deal, and it was systematically underestimated for at least the first 10, 11 years. And you could trade it. It went up smoothly for 10, 11 years. It didn't get repriced all at once because we're in a world where nothing big ever happens, and so we have no way of processing it when something pretty big happens. The internet was pretty big in '99. Bitcoin was moderately big. The internet was really big. Bitcoin was moderately big, and I'd say passing the Turing test is really big. It's on the same scale as the internet, and because our lived experience is that so little has felt like it's been changing for the last few decades, we're probably underestimating it.
It's interesting that you say that so little, we feel like so little has changed, because if you're a person, how old are you?
Same age as you were,
okay.
Born 1967.
So in our age, we've seen all the change, right? We saw the end of the Cold War, we saw answering machines, we saw VHS tapes, then we saw the internet, and then where we're at right now, which is like this bizarre moment in time where people carry the internet around with them in their pocket every day. And these super sophisticated computers that are ubiquitous. Everybody has one. There's incredible technology that's being ramped up every year. They're getting better all the time. And now there's AI. There's AI on your phone. You could access ChatGPT and a bunch of different programs on your phone. And I think that's an insane change. I think that's one of the most, especially with the use of social media, it's one of the most bizarre changes I think our culture's ever. Most bizarre.
It can be a big change culturally or politically.
Oh, Darius, nice.
The kinds of questions I would ask is, how do you measure it economically? How much does it change GDP? How much
Prank him
does it
with the
change
pink kitty.
And certainly the story I would generally tell for the last 50 years, since the 1970s, early 70s.
Turn down legal little so I can hear Peter Till. Let's go. Let's go.
There's been very limited progress in the world of atoms, the world of physical things. And there has been a lot of progress in the world of bits, information, computers, internet, mobile
Flash
internet.
Ghost.
Now AI.
What are you referring to when you say the world of physical things?
It's any. If we had defined technology, if we were sitting here in 1967, the year we were born, and we had a discussion about technology, what technology would have meant? It would have meant computers. It would have also meant rockets. It would have meant supersonic airplanes. It would have meant new medicines. It would have meant the green revolution in agriculture, maybe underwater cities.
Water cities.
It sort of had, because technology simply gets defined as that which is changing, that which is progressing, and so there's progress on all these fronts. Today, last 20 years, when you talk about technology, you're normally just talking about information technology. Technology has been reduced to meaning computers, and that tells you that the structure of progress has been weird. There's been this narrow cone of very intense progress around the world of bits, around the world of computers, and then all the other areas have been relatively stagnant. We're not moving any faster. The Concorde got decommissioned in 2003 or whenever. And then with all the low-tech airport security measures, it takes even longer to fly, to get through all of them from one city to the next. The highways have gone backwards because there are more traffic jams. We haven't figured out ways around those. So we're literally moving slower than we were 40 or 50 years ago. And then and that's sort of the and then of course there's also a sense in which the screens and the devices have this effect of distracting us from this. So when you're riding a 100-year-old subway in New York City and you're looking at your iPhone, you can look at, wow, this is this cool new gadget, but you're also being distracted from the fact that your lived environment hasn't changed in 100 years. And so there's a question, how important is this world of bits versus the world of atoms? I would say, as human beings, we're physically embodied in a material world. And so I would always say this world of atoms is pretty important. And when that's pretty stagnant, there's a lot of stuff that doesn't make sense. I was an undergraduate at Stanford, late 80s. And at the time, in retrospect, every engineering area would have been a bad thing to go into. Mechanical engineering, chemical engineering, all these engineering fields where you're tinkering and trying to do new things, because these things turned out to be stuck. They were regulated. You couldn't come up with new things to do. Nuclear engineering, aeroastro engineering, people already knew those were really bad ones to go into. They were, outlawed. You weren't going to make any progress in new nuclear reactor designs or stuff like that. Electrical engineering, which was the one that's sort of adjacent to making semiconductors, that one was still okay. And then the only field that was actually going to progress a lot was computer science. And again, it's been very powerful, but that was not the felt sense in the 1980s. In the 1980s, computer science was this ridiculous, inferior subject. I always, the linguistic cut is always when people use the word science. I'm in favor of science. I'm not in favor of science in quotes. And when it's always a tell that it's not real science. And so when we call it climate science or political science or social science, you're just
Atoms
sort of
and bits,
making it up.
baby.
and you have an inferiority complex to real science, which is something like physics or chemistry. And computer science was in the same category as social science or political science. It was a fake field for people.
Even with a
who found
level
electrical
disadvantage like
engineering
that,
or
that's crazy.
math way too hard, and sort of dropped out of the real science and real engineering fields.
You don't feel that climate science is a real science?
It's,
My bad.
It is,
I was respecting him too much.
Well, there's several different things one could say. It's possible climate change is happening. It's possible we don't have great accounts of why that's going on. So I'm not questioning any of those things. But how scientific it is, I don't think it's a place where we have really vigorous debates. You know, maybe the climate is increasing because of carbon dioxide emissions, temperatures are going up. Maybe it's methane. Maybe it's people are eating too much steak. It's the cows flatulating, and you have to measure how much is methane a greenhouse gas versus carbon dioxide. I don't think they're rigorously doing that stuff scientifically. And I think the fact that it's called climate science tells you that it's more dogmatic than anything that's truly science should be.
Why is that?
Dogma doesn't mean that it's wrong, but
why is the fact that it's called climate science mean that it's more dogmatic? Because if you said nuclear science, you wouldn't question it, right?
But no one calls it nuclear science. They call it nuclear engineering. Because the only thing is I'm just making a narrow linguistic point.
That is legitimately science?
Well, at this point, people say computer science has worked, but
right.
In the 1980s, all I'm saying is it was in the same categories. Let's say social science, political science. It was a tell that the people doing it kind of deep down knew they weren't doing real science.
Well, there's certainly ideology that's connected to climate science, and then there's certainly corporations that are invested in this prospect of green energy, and the concept of green energy, and they're profiting off of it and pushing these different things, whether it be electric car mandates or whatever it is. Like California, I think it's 2035. They have a mandate that all new vehicles have to be electric, which is hilarious when you're connected to a grid that can't support the electric cars it currently has. After they said that, within a month or two, Gavin Newsom asked people to not charge their Teslas because it was summer and the grid was fucked.
Yeah, look, it was all linked into all these ideological projects in all these ways, and there's an environmental project which is and maybe it shouldn't be scientific. There's the hardcore environmentalist argument is we only have one planet, and we don't have time to do science. If we have to do rigorous science and you can prove that we're overheating, it'll be too late. And so if you're a hardcore environmentalist, you don't want to have as high a standard of science. Yeah, my intuition is certainly when you
gotta dodge the outer keys.
Too dogmatic, too ideological. Maybe it doesn't even work.
So Moomoo's probably up here somewhere.
Maybe climate science is not like my question is like maybe methane is a worse is it more dangerous greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide? We're not even capable of measuring that.
Well, we're also ignoring certain things like regenerative farms that sequester carbon. And then you have people like Bill Gates saying that planting trees to deal with carbon is ridiculous. That's a ridiculous way to do it. Like, how is that ridiculous? They literally turn carbon dioxide into oxygen.
Oh, get fucked, idiot.
That's what the food of plants is. That's what powers the whole plant life and the way we have the symbiotic relationship with them. Like, and the more carbon dioxide is, the greener it is, which is why it's greener today on Earth than has been in 100 years.
Sure.
These are all facts that are inconvenient to people that have a very specific, narrow window of how to approach this.
Sure. Although there probably are ways to steelman the other side too, where maybe the original 1970s. I think the manifesto that's always very interesting from the other side was this book by the Club of Rome, 1972, The Limits of Growth. And we need to head towards a society in which there's 0%. There's
my wife!
Unlimited growth.
Oh, fuck,
because
I'm an
if you
idiot.
have unlimited growth, you're going to run out of resources. if you don't run out of resources, you'll hit a pollution constraint. But in the 1970s, it was you're going to have overpopulation, you're going to run out of oil. We had the oil shocks, and then by the 90s, it sort of morphed into more of the pollution problem with carbon dioxide, climate change, other environmental things. But there is sort of there's been some improvement in oil, carbon fuels with fracking, things like this in Texas. It's not at the scale that's been enough to give an American standard of living to the whole planet. And we consume 100 million barrels of oil a day globally. Maybe fracking can add 10%, 10 million to that. If everybody on this planet
I should
has
be
an
buying
American
control
standard of
words.
living, it's something like 300, 400 million barrels of oil. And I don't think that's there. So that's kind of. I always wonder whether that was the real environmental argument. Is we can't have an American standard of living for the whole planet. We somehow can't justify this degree of inequality, and therefore, we have to figure out ways to dial back and tax the carbon, restrict it, and maybe there's some sort of a Malthusian calculus that's more about resources than about pollution.
How much of that could the demand for oil could be mitigated by nuclear?
You probably could mitigate it a lot. There's a question why the nuclear thing has gone so long. It's, especially if you have electric vehicles, right?
Right.
It's the combustion engine's probably hard to get nuclear to work, but if you shift to electric vehicles, you can charge them, your Tesla cars at night, and that would seemingly work. And there's definitely a history of energy where it was always in the direction of more intense use. It went from wood to coal to oil, which is a more compact form of energy, and in a way it takes up less of the environment. And then if we move from oil to uranium, that's even it's even smaller. And so in a sense, the smaller, the more dense the energy is, the less of the environment it takes up. And when we go from oil to natural gas, which takes up more space, and from natural gas to solar or wind, we have to pollute the whole environment by putting up windmills everywhere, or you have to you have to cover the whole desert with solar panels.
And that is a good way to look at it, because it is a form of pollution.
And so there was a way that nuclear was supposed to be the energy mode of the 21st century. And then there are these historical questions. Why did it get stopped? Why did we not go down that route? The standard explanation of why it stopped was that there were all these dangers. We had 3 Mile Island in 1979, Chernobyl in 1986, and then the Fukushima one in Japan, I think, 2011. And you had these various accidents. My alternate theory on why nuclear energy really stopped is that it was sort of dystopian or even apocalyptic, because it turned out that it was all it turned out to be very dual use. If you build nuclear power plants, it's only sort of one step away from building nuclear weapons, and it turned out to be a lot trickier to separate those two things out than it looked. And I think the signature moment was 1974 or 75, when India gets the nuclear bomb, and the U.S. I believe transferred the nuclear reactor technology to India. We thought they couldn't weaponize it, and then it turned out it was pretty easy to weaponize. And then sort of the geopolitical problem with nuclear power was you either
I stuck around too long, guys.
We need a double standard where we have nuclear power in the U.S., but we don't allow other countries.
Yeah,
to have
I stuck around
nuclear
too
power
long.
because
My
the
bad.
U.S. gets to keep its nuclear weapons, we don't let 100 other countries have nuclear weapons, and that's an extreme double standard, probably a little bit hard to justify. Or you need some kind of really effective
TP up.
global governance, where you have a one-world government that regulates all this stuff, which doesn't sound that good either. And then sort of the compromise was just to regulate it so much that maybe the nuclear plants got grandfathered in, but became too expensive to build new ones.
Jeez.
Like even China, which is the country where they're building the most nuclear power plants, they built way less than people expected a decade ago, because they don't trust their own designs, so they have to copy the over safety, over protected designs from the West, and the nuclear power costs too much money. It's cheaper to do coal.
Wow.
So if I'm not getting the numbers exactly right, but if you look at what percent of Chinese electricity was nuclear, it wasn't that high. It was like maybe 4 or 5% in 2013, 2014, and the percent hasn't gone up in 10 years because they've maybe doubled the amount of electricity they use, and maybe they doubled the nuclear, but the relative percentage is still a pretty small part of the mix because it's just more expensive when you have these over safety designed reactors. There are probably ways to build small reactors that are way cheaper, but then you still have this dual use thing. Do you create plutonium? Are there ways you can create a pathway to building more nuclear weapons?
And if there was innovation, if nuclear engineering had gotten to a point where, let's say there wasn't 3 Mile Island or Chernobyl didn't happen, do you think that it would have gotten to a much more efficient and a much more effective version by now?
Well, my understanding is we have way more efficient designs. We have you can do small reactor designs, which are, you don't need this giant containment structure, so it costs much less per kilowatt hour of electricity to produce. So I think we have those designs. They're just not allowed. But then I think the problem is that if you were able to build them in all these countries all over the world, you still have this dual use problem.
Right.
And again, my alternate history of what really went wrong with nuclear power, it wasn't 3 Mile Island, it wasn't Chernobyl. That's the official story. The real story was India getting the bomb.
Wow, that makes sense. That completely makes sense. Jeez Louise.
And then this is always the question about there's always a big picture question. People ask me, if I'm right about this picture of this slowdown in tech, this sort of stagnation in many dimensions, and then there's always a question, why did this happen? And my cop-out answer is always why questions are overdetermined, because it can be there are multiple reasons. So it could be why it could be we became a more feminized, risk-averse society. It could be that the education system worked less well. It could be that we were just out of ideas. The easy ideas have been found. The hard ideas, nature's cupboard was bare. The low-hanging fruit had been picked. So that it can be overdetermined. But I think one dimension that's not to be underrated for the science and tech stagnation was that
Yeah, the climate science thing is so funny. Ravenous Hydra. Ravenous Hydra. Ravenous
dimension, and probably what happened at Los Alamos in 1945, and then with the thermonuclear weapons in the early 50s. It took a while for it to really seep in.
He really is that meme of the barbarian who touts the climate science thing. Yeah, exactly.
Maybe a stagnant world in which the physicists don't get to do anything and they have to putter around with DEI and you're not, but you don't build weapons that blow up the world anymore. Is that a feature or a bug? And so the stagnation was sort of like this response. And so it sucks that we've lived in this world for 50 years where a lot of stuff has been inert. But if we had a world that was still accelerating on all these dimensions with supersonic, hypersonic planes, and hypersonic weapons, and modular nuclear reactors, maybe we wouldn't be sitting here and the whole world would have already blown up. And so we're in that we're in the stagnant path of the multiverse because it had this partially protective thing, even though in all these other ways I feel it's deeply deranged our society.
That's a very interesting perspective, and it makes a lot of sense. It really does. And particularly the dual use thing with nuclear power, and especially distributing that to other countries. When you talk about the stagnation in this country, like, I don't know how much you follow this whole UAP nonsense. I know we met, what was that guy's name at your place? The guy who did Chariots of the Gods?
Oh, Von Daniken.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, you didn't, you thought he was too crazy. You like Hancock, but you don't like Von Daniken.
So I didn't think he's too crazy. He just willfully, in my opinion, ignores evidence that would show that some of the things that he's saying have already been solved. And I think his hypothesis is all related to this concept that we have been visited, and that's how all these things were built, and that this technology was brought here from another world. And I think he's very ideologically locked into these ideas. And I think a much more compelling idea is that there were various...
Fuck! I should have gone back and queued him. Fuck.
10,000
I don't know where
years
my
ago.
team went.
Whatever it was. Whatever the year was where they
Team?
built some of the insane structures. It's 4,500 years ago, they roughly think the pyramids were built. Like, whatever the fuck was going on there, I think those were human beings. I think those were human beings in that place, in that time. And I think they had some sort of very sophisticated technology that was lost. And things can get lost. Things can get lost in cataclysms.
Serves me for trying to show up to a team fight.
They can get lost in disease and famine, and there's all sorts of war, all sorts of reasons. The burning of the Library of Alexandria. There's all sorts of ways that technology gets lost forever. And you can have today someone living in Los Angeles in the most sophisticated high-tech society the world has ever known, while you still have people that live in the Amazon that live in the same way that they have lived for thousands of years. So those things can happen in the same planet at the same time. And I think while the rest of the world was essentially operating at a much lower vibration, there were people in Egypt that were doing some extraordinary things. I don't know how they got the information. Maybe they did get it from visitors. Maybe they did, but there's no real compelling evidence that they did. I think there's much more compelling evidence that a cataclysm happened. When you look at the Younger Dryas impact theory, it's all entirely based on science. It's entirely based on core samples and iridium content, and also massive changes in the environment over a very short period of time, particularly the melting of the ice caps in North America, and just impact craters all around the world that we know something happened roughly 11,000 years ago. And probably again.
I don't have
10,000 years
MAMR.
ago. I think it's a regular occurrence on this planet that things go sideways, and there's massive natural disasters, and I think that it's very likely that
there's the Bronze Age civilization collapse somewhere in the mid 12th century BC,
MAMR.
and probably in some ways the one in which we have the best history is the fall of the Roman Empire.
What is the thing I get?
Which was obviously the culmination of the classical world, and it's somehow extremely unraveled. So I think my view on it is probably somewhere between yours and the
Von Daniken?
Negatron.
No, not Von Daniken.
Okay.
I'm more on the other side. But let me try to define why this. Let me agree on why this is so important today. It's not just of antiquarian interest, and the reason it matters today is because the alternative. If you say civilization has seen great rises and falls, it's gone through these great cycles. Maybe the Bronze Age civilizations were very advanced. Someone came up with iron weapons. There was just one dimension where they progressed, but then everything else they could destroy. And so, or the fall of the Roman Empire was again this pretty cataclysmic thing where there were diseases and then there were political things that unraveled, but somehow it was a massive regression for 400, 500, 600 years into the Dark Ages, and the sort of naive, the progressive views, things always just got monotonically better. And there's sort of this revisionist, purely progressive history where even the Roman Empire didn't decline. And even, this one sort of stupid way to quantify this stuff is with pure demographics. And so it's the question, how many people lived in the past? And
Come on, get out.
and the rises and falls of civilization story is there were more people who lived in the Roman Empire because it was more advanced, to support a larger population, and then the population declined. The city of Rome maybe had 1 million people at its peak, and then by 650 AD, it's down to 10,000 people or less. You have this complete collapse in population, and then the sort of alternate, purely progressive view is the population has always just been monotonically increasing because it's a measure of how, in some sense, things in aggregate have always been getting better. So I am definitely on your side that population had great rises and falls, civilizations had great rises and falls, and so that part of it, I agree with you, or even some variant of what Hancock or von Daniken say. The place where I would say I think things are different is I don't think and therefore it seems possible something could happen to our civilization. That's always the upshot of it. If it had been monotonically always progressing, then there's nothing we should worry about. Nothing can possibly go wrong. And then certainly the thing, the sort of alternate Hancock, von Daniken, Joe Rogan history of the world tells us is that we shouldn't take our civilization for granted. There's things that can go really haywire. I agree with that. The one place where I differ is I do think our civilization today is, on some dimensions, way more advanced than any of these past civilizations. I don't think any of them had nuclear weapons. I don't think any of them had, spaceships, or anything like that. And so the failure mode is likely to be somewhat different from these past ones.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think technology progressed in a different direction. That's what I think. I think that structural technology, building technology, had somehow or another achieved levels of competence that's not available today. When you look at the construction of the Great Pyramid of Giza, there's 2,300,000 stones in it. The whole thing points to due north, south, east, and west. It's an incredible achievement. The stones, some of them were moved from a quarry that was 500 miles away through the mountains. They have no idea how they do it. Massive stones. The ones inside the King's Chamber, but they're like the biggest ones are like 80 tons. It's crazy. The whole thing's crazy. Like, how did they do it? Like, whatever they did without machines, supposedly. They did without the use of combustion engine. They didn't have electricity. And yet they were able to do something that stands the test of time, not just so you could look at it. Like you can go to the Acropolis and see the Parthenon. It's gorgeous. It's amazing. It's incredible. If I can understand how people could have built it. The pyramids is one of those things that you just look at and you go, what the fuck was going on here? What was going on here? And none of these people are still around. You have this strange culture now that's entirely based around, you have Cairo and an enormous population of visitors, right? Which is a lot of it. People just going to stare at these ancient relics. What was going on that those people were so much more advanced than anyone anywhere else in the world?
Yeah, I'm not sure I would anchor on the technological part, but I think the piece that is very hard for us to comprehend is what motivated them culturally.
Well, how did they do it physically?
Why did they do it? Why were you motivated?
So why, but also how? How is a big one, because it's really difficult to solve. There's no traditional, conventional explanations for the construction, the movement of the stones, the amount of time that it would take. If you move 10 stones a day, I believe it takes 664 years to make one of those pyramids. So how many people were involved? How long did it take? How'd they get them there? How'd they figure out how to do it? How come the shittier pyramids seem to be dated later? Like what was going on in that particular period of time where they figured out how to do something so extraordinary that even today, 4,500 years later, we stare at it and we go, I don't know. I don't know what the fuck they did.
I haven't studied it carefully enough. I'll trust you that it's very hard. I would say the real mystery is why were they motivated? And it's because you can't live in a pyramid. It's just it was just the afterlife of the pharaoh.
There's some debate about that. Christopher Dunn is an engineer who believes that it was some sort of a power plant. He's got this very bizarre theory that there was a chamber that exists. If you can see the structure of the pyramid, the inside of it, there's a chamber that's subterranean, and he believes this subterranean chamber was pounding on the surface of the earth and of the walls of the thing, creating this very specific vibration. They had shafts that came down into the queen's chamber. These shafts, they would pour chemicals into these shafts, and then there was limestone at the end of it. This is all his theory, not mine. The end of it, there was this limestone, which is permeable, right? So the limestone, which is porous, these gases come through and creates this hydrogen that's inside of this chamber. Then there are these shafts inside the king's chamber that are they're getting energy from space, you know, gamma rays and all the shit from space. And that it's going through these chambers, which are very specifically designed to target these gases and put them into this chamber where they would interact with this energy. And he believes it's enough to create electricity.
Man,
it's a crazy theory. But
look, I'm always too fast to debunk all these things. But just coming back to our earlier conversation, it must have been a crazy power plant to have a containment structure much bigger than a nuclear reactor.
Yeah, well, it's ridiculous. But it's also a different kind of technology, right? If nuclear technology was completely not on the table, they didn't understand atoms at all. But they did understand that there's rays that come from space and that you could somehow harness the energy of these things with specific gases and through some method convert that into some form of electricity.
But if it takes so much power to put all these rocks on the pyramid, you have to always look at how efficient the power plant is. So it can't just be it has to be like the craziest reaction ever to justify such a big containment structure. Because even nuclear power plants don't work economically.
Yeah, I think so too.
Well, they didn't do a lot of them. You know,
I think I can still actually.
In Giza. And then there was other pyramids that he thinks had different functions that were smaller. But the whole purpose of it is, or the whole point of it is, we don't know what the fuck it is. We don't know why they did it. We have a group of new archaeologists that are looking at it from a completely different theory. They're not looking at it like it's a tomb. The established archaeologists that insisted that this
while they weren't there, I could have.
Newer archaeologists, established archaeologists,
that's my bad.
Looking at it and considering whether or not there were some other uses for this thing, and one of them is the concept of the pharaoh plant.
I'm always. I don't know if this is an alternate history theory, but I'm always into the James Fraser, Golden Bough, Rene Girard, violence, sacred history, where you have always this question about the origins of monarchy and kingship, and the sort of Girard Fraser intuition is that it's something like if every king is a kind of living God, then we have to also believe the opposite, that maybe every god is a dead or murdered king, and that somehow societies were organized around scapegoats. The scapegoats were, there was sort of a crisis in the archaic community. It got blamed on a scapegoat. The scapegoat was attributed all these powers, and then at some point, the scapegoat, before he gets executed, figures out a way to postpone his execution and turn the power into something real. And so there's sort of this very weird adjacency between the monarch and the scapegoat, and then I don't know. The sort of riff on would be that the first pyramid did not need to be invented. It was just the stones that were thrown on a victim, and then it somehow, and that's the original. The original form.
That were thrown on a victim.
A community stones a victim to death. A tribe runs after a victim, you stone him to death, throw stones on the victim. That's how you create the first tomb. And then
and then as it gets more complicated, you create a tomb that's 2 million stones.
and you get a pharaoh. You get a pharaoh who figures out a way to postpone his own execution or something like this. I think there's I'm going to blank on the name of this ritual, but I believe in the old Egyptian kingdoms, which were sort of around the time of the Great Pyramids or even before. It was something like in the 30th year of the reign of the pharaoh gets transformed into a living god. And then this perhaps dates to a time where in the 30th year of the pharaoh's reign, the pharaoh would get ritually sacrificed or killed. And you have all these societies where the kings were allowed to rule for an allotted time, where you become king and you draw the number of pebbles out of a vase, and that corresponds to how many years.
Was this Jamie?
The Sed Festival.
Heb said Festival of Tail was an ancient Egyptian ceremony that celebrated the continued rule of Pharaoh. The name was taken from the name of the Egyptian wolf god, one of whose name was
This is what I'm talking about.
Or Sed. The less formal feast name, the Feast of the Tail, is derived.
Next paragraph's the one to start.
Okay.
That one right there. The ancient festival might perhaps have been instituted to replace a ritual of murdering a pharaoh who was unable to continue to rule effectively because of age or condition.
Interesting. So you can't kill him now.
And then eventually, said festivals were jubilee several of it had the throne for 30 years.
And then every 3 to 4 years after that.
So when it becomes unthinkable to kill the pharaoh gets turned into a living god. Before that, the pharaoh gets murdered and then gets worshipped as a dead pharaoh or distant god.
That's interesting, but it still doesn't solve the engineering puzzle. The engineering puzzle is the biggest one. How did they do that?
Well, the one I'm focusing on is the motivational puzzle.
Yeah,
why
even if you have all the motivation in the world, if you want to build a structure that's insane to build today, and you're doing it 4,500 years ago, we're dealing with a massive puzzle.
I think the motivational part's the harder one to solve. If you can figure out the motivation, you'll figure out a way to organize the whole society, and if you can get the whole society working on it, you can probably do it.
But don't you think that his grasp of power was in peril in the first place, which is why they decided to come up with this idea of turning them into a living god? So to have the amount of resources and power, and then the engineering, and then the understanding of whatever methods they use to shape and move these things.
Well, this is always the anthropological debate between Voltaire, the Enlightenment thinker of the 18th century, and Durkheim, the 19th century anthropologist. And Voltaire believes that religion originates as a conspiracy of the priests to maintain power. And so politics comes first, the politicians invent religion. And then Durkheim says the causation is the other way around, that somehow religion came first, and then politics somehow came out of it. Of course, once the politics comes out of it, the priests, the religious authorities have political power. They figure out ways to manipulate it, things like this. But I find the Durkheim story far more plausible than the Voltaire one. I think the religious categories are primary, and the political categories are secondary.
So you think the religion came first? But what about if we emanated from tribal societies? Tribal societies have always had leaders. When you have leaders, you're going to have dissent, you're going to have challenges, you're going to have politics, you have people negotiating to try to maintain power, keep everything organized. That's the origin of politics, correct?
I think that's a whitewashed Enlightenment rationalist description of the origin of politics. Yeah,
what do you think the origin of politics?
I think it's far more violent than that. What you're giving me.
Well, it's very vile. The control of power and maintaining power involves murder and sabotage.
Well, that's more like it.
Yeah.
But what you gave me a minute ago sounds more like a social contract theory, in which people sit down, negotiate, and have a nice legal chit chat to draw up the social contract. That is a complete fiction.
Yeah, I don't think that. I think that there was probably various levels of stability that were achieved when agriculture and when establishments were constructed that were near resources.
Game's over.
Where they didn't have to worry as much about food and water and things along those lines. Things probably got a little bit more civil. But I think that the origins of it are like the origins of all human conflict. It's filled with murder.
Well, I think at the beginning was madness.
Yeah, madness.
And I don't know. I don't know if it got that much more rational. I don't know if it's that much more rational today.
Well,
so
in some ways it's not, right?
I mean, this is again back to the the progressive conception. Have we really progressed? How much have we really progressed from that? But yeah, my version would be that it was much more. It was organized around, acts of mass violence. Like maybe you externalize it onto a mastodon or hunting some big animal or something like this. But the real problem of violence, it wasn't external. It was mostly internal. It was violence with people who were near you, proximate to you. It wasn't even natural class
so annoying.
or other tribes. It was sort of much more the internal stuff, and it's very different. I think the human situation is somehow very, very different from something like, I don't know, an ape primate hierarchy, where in an ape context you have an alpha male. He's the strongest, and there's some sort of natural dominance, and you don't need to have a fight to the death typically, because you know who's the strongest, and you don't need to push it all the way. In a human context, it's always possible for 2 or 3 guys to gang up on the alpha male. So it's somehow the culture is more important, and if they can talk to each other, and you get language, and then they can coordinate, and they can gang up on the leader, and then you have to stop them from ganging up on the leader. And how do you do that? And so there's some sort of radical difference between a human and let's say a pre-human world.
Have you seen Chimp Empire?
No.
Chimp Empire is a fascinating documentary series on Netflix where these scientists had been embedded with this tribe of chimpanzees for decades. And so because they were embedded, they had very specific rules. You has to maintain at least 20 yards from you and any of the chimps. No food. You can never have food, and don't look them in the eyes. And as long as you do that, they don't feel you're a threat, and they think of you as a natural part of their environment, almost like you don't exist. They behave completely naturally. Well, it shows in that sometimes it's not the largest, strongest one, and that some chimps form bonds with other chimps, and they form coalitions. And they do have some sort of politicking, and they do help each other. They groom each other. They do specific things for each other. And then one of the things that happens also, they get invaded by other chimps, and that chimps leave and they go on patrol, and other chimps gang up on them and kill them, and they try to fight and battle over resources. So it's
betas and chads. Betas create society. That's exactly right.
The strongest chimp prevails, because one of the chimps that was dominant was an older chimp, and he was smaller than some of the other chimps, but he had formed a coalition with all these other chimps, and they all respected him, and they all knew that they would be treated fairly. And being treated fairly is a very important thing with chimpanzees. They get very jealous if they think that things are not fair, which is why that guy was attacked. I know, you know that guy who had a pet chimpanzee. He brought it a birthday cake. The other chimps weren't getting a piece of the cake, and someone had fucked up and left a door open. They got out and mauled this guy because he didn't give them some of the cake.
Yes, I find all of that quite plausible, but I think both of us can be correct. So there's the true story of hominization, of how we became humans. There's a way to tell it where it's continuous with our animal past, and where it's just, there's things like this with the chimpanzees or the baboons or, other primates. And then there is a part of the story that I think is also more discontinuous. My judgment is we probably, in a Darwinian context, we always stress the continuity. I'm always a little bit the contrarian, and so I believe in Darwin's theory, but I think we should also be skeptical of ways it's too dogmatic, and Darwin's theories make us gloss over the discontinuities. And I think, the one type of, and it doesn't necessarily happen overnight, but one type of fairly dramatic discontinuity is that, is that humans have something like language, and even though chimpanzees probably, I don't know, they have an IQ of 80, or they're pretty smart, but when you don't have a rich symbolic system, that leads to sort of a very, very different kind of structure. And there's something about language and the kind of coordination that allows, and the ways that it forces you to, it enables you to coordinate on violence, and then it encourages you to channel violence in certain sacred religious directions. I think creates a something radically different about human society. We differ. Humans tell each other stories. A lot of the stories are not true; they're myths. But I think that's some sort of a very important difference from even our closest primate relatives. But this is sort of like another way of getting at what's so crazy about ChatGPT and passing the Turing test. Because if we had sat here 2 years ago and you asked me, what is the distinctive feature of a human being? What makes someone a human, and how, and in a way that differs from everybody else? It's not perfect, but my go-to answer would have been language. You're a 3-year-old, you're an 80-year-old. Just about all humans can speak languages. Just about all non-humans cannot speak languages. It's this binary thing, and then that's sort of a way of telling us again why passing the Turing test was way more important than superintelligence or anything else.
Yeah, I could see that.
Sorry, I don't want to go back to that tangent. But
it's a good tangent.
Go ahead, connect
it's great. Keep tangenting off. Have fun. It's great. Do you think? What do you think the factor was? There's a lot of debate about this. Like the factor was that separated us from these animals, and
Dude,
why
it's
we became what we
so
became.
funny.
Because we're so vast.
You're exactly right. You're exactly right, Sean. It's literally just like beta town philosopher being pulled in front of the king, and he's like knows he's gonna be executed if he doesn't satisfy the king, and so he's just like, no, this is what I think, and the king's like, I don't know if I agree, and the philosopher's like, no, you're probably right actually. It's my bad, dude, my bad.
Different than any other primate. Like, so what do you think took place? Like the doubling of the human brain size over a period of 2 million years is one of the greatest mysteries in the entire fossil record. We don't know what the fuck happened. There's a lot of theories. The throwing arm, cooking meat. There's a lot of theories, but we really have no idea.
Well, again, if I let me do sort of linguistic riff. I think Aristotelian Darwinian biology. Aristotle, you always differ things by put them in categories, and man, I think the line Aristotle has is something: man differs from the other animals in his greater aptitude for imitation, and I would say that we are giant imitating machines. And of course, the Darwinian riff on this is, to imitate is to ape. And so we differ from the ape. We're more ape-like than the apes. We are far better at aping each other than the apes are. To a first cut, I would say our brains are giant imitation machines. That's how you learn language as a kid. You imitate your parents, and that's how culture gets transmitted. But then there are a lot of dimensions of imitation that are also very dangerous, because it's not. Imitation doesn't just happen on this symbolic, linguistic level. It's also, you imitate things you want. You want a banana, I want a banana. You want a blue ball, I can have a red ball. I want a blue ball because you have a blue ball. And so there's something about imitation that creates culture. That is incredibly important pedagogically. Learning. It's how you master something, how in all these different ways, and then a lot of it has this incredibly conflictual dimension as well, and then there's so I think that was sort of core to the things that are both great and troubled about humanity, and that was in some ways the problem that needed to be solved.
So you think that the motivation of imitation is the essential first steps that led us to become human?
There's some story like, and again, this is a one-dimensional,
Right.
one explanation fits all. But yeah, the explanation I would go with is that it was something like, our brains got bigger, and so we were more powerful imitation machines. And there were things about that were
What?
that were that made us a lot more powerful and we could learn things
Can't
and we
we
could
affirm
remember
her
things,
like
and there was
that?
cultural transmission that
There we go.
happened. But then it also, we could build better weapons, and we became more violent, and it also had a very, very destructive element. And then somehow the imitation, had to be channeled in these sort of ritualized, religious, kinds of ways. And that's why I think all these things sort of somehow came up together in parallel.
But what about the physical adaptation? Like, what would be the motivation of the animal to change form and to have its brain grow so large and to lose all its hair and to become soft and fleshy like we are, as opposed to like rough and durable like almost every other primate is?
Well, you can always tell these retrospective just so stories and how this all worked out, but it would seem the naive retrospective story would be that there are a lot of ways that humans are, less strong than the other apes, or that all these ways where we're in some sense weaker
Physically, at least.
physically, but maybe it was just this basic trade-off. More of your energy went into your mind and into your brain, and then your fist wasn't as strong, but you could build a better axe, and that made you stronger than an ape. And that's where a brain with less energy was spent on growing a hair to keep warm in the winter, and then you used your brain to build an axe and skin a bear and get some fur for the winter, or something like that.
Yeah, I guess. It's just such a leap. It's such a leap and different than any other animal. What was the primary motivating factor? Like, what was the thing? McKenna believes it was psilocybin. I'm sure you ever heard that theory, McKenna's stoned ape theory, which is a fascinating one. But there's a lot of different theories about what took place. But
the one I would go on was that there was this dimension of increased imitation. There was some kind of cultural linguistic dimension that was incredibly important. It probably was also somehow linked to dealing with all the violence that came with it, all the conflicts that came with it. I'd be more open to the stoned ape theory. People, I had this conversation with the other guy, Murorescu, the Immortality Key guy, and I always feel they whitewash it too much.
how so?
It's like if you had these crazy Dionysian rituals in which people, there's probably lots of crazy sex, there's
Oh,
probably lots of
fuck.
crazy violence that was tied to it, and so maybe
Universe
you'd
of
be
Minion,
out of your
you got
mind
it.
to be hunting a woolly mammoth, and maybe you can't be completely,
But they weren't hunting woolly mammoths during the Eleusinian Mysteries.
No, but you were. I don't know. You went to war to fight the neighboring tribe. It's probably more dangerous than hunting.
Right, but they also did absolutely have these rituals, and they have absolutely found
I
trace
don't-
elements of
I don't question that.
Okay.
I don't question that at all. I just think they probably part of it was also was a way to channel violence. It was probably whenever, I don't know, was there some degree to which whenever you went to war, you were on drugs. You
Oh
were
yeah.
blessed.
Well, we know about the
stuff like that.
Vikings. The Vikings
Gotcha.
most certainly took mushrooms before they went into battle.
And you know, maybe it makes you less coordinated or something, but
No.
if you're less scared,
It
that's
doesn't-
probably,
It doesn't make you less coordinated.
if you're just a little bit less scared, that's probably super important.
It increases visual acuity. There's a lot of benefits that would happen physically, especially if you got the dose right.
Yeah, I think I pushed
You
too
know,
hard.
it
That's my
increases visual acuity, edge detection's better, it makes people more sensitive, probably more aware, probably a better hunter, and
But I'm sympathetic to all these mushrooms, psychedelic drug, historical usage theories. I suspect it was very widespread. I just think a lot of it was in these contexts that were pretty transgressive.
yeah, I think they're not mutually exclusive. I think just giving the way the world was back then, for sure, violence was everywhere. Violence was a part of daily life. Violence was a part of how society was kept together. Violence was entertainment in Rome, right? For sure, violence was everything. It was a big part of it. And I think release and
Hey,
and
wife,
the
come back.
anxiety of
Wife,
that violence
wife,
also
wife,
led
wife!
people to want to be intoxicated and do different things that separated them from a normal state of consciousness. But I do think it's also probably where democracy came from. I think having those Eleusinian mystery rituals where they would get together and do psychedelics and under this very controlled set and setting, I think that's the birthplace of a lot of very interesting and innovative ideas. I think a lot
just
of
gotta chill out. Let it
interesting and
push
innovative
out.
ideas currently are being at least dreamt up, thought of. They have their roots in some sort of altered conscious experience.
Well, it's, man, I don't know. I think this stuff is very powerful. I think it is.
I'm trying to get her back in the middle of the lane.
I definitely think it shouldn't be outlawed. Pretty hardcore libertarian on all the drug legalization stuff. And then I do wonder. I do wonder exactly how these things work.
It's Peter Thiel.
It probably the classical world version of it was that it was something that you did in a fairly controlled setting. You didn't do it every day, and it was some way, I imagine, to get a very different perspective on your 9-to-5 job or whatever you want to call it, but you didn't necessarily want to really decamp to the other world altogether.
Oh, for sure. It's too dangerous to do. I don't think anybody thinks they did. I think that was part of the whole thing.
Where do you think that line is? Like, should everyone do one ayahuasca trip, or if you do an ayahuasca trip a year, is that
I don't
too
think
much?
everyone has to do anything, and I think everyone has their own requirements. And I think as you do, that everything like this, especially psychedelics. One of the more disappointing things recently was that the FDA had denied. They did these MDMA trials for about all this.
Yep.
Yeah, very, very disappointing that they wanted to make MDMA therapy available to veterans and people with severe PTSD, and has extreme benefits, clinical benefits, known, documented benefits, and for whatever reason the FDA decided that they have to go through a whole new series of trials to try to get this stuff legalized, which is very disappointing. And
Yeah, I was very bullish on this stuff happening, and the way I thought about it 4 or 5 years ago was that it was a hack to doing a double-blind study, and because the FDA always has this concept that you need to do a double-blind study, you give one third of the people you give a sugar pill, and 2/3 you give the real drug, and no one knows whether they have the sugar pill or the real drug,
Right.
and then you see how it works. And science requires a double-blind study, and then my anti-double-blind study theory is, if it really works, you don't need a double-blind study. It should just work. And there's something sociopathic about doing double-blind studies because 1/3 of the people who have this bad disease are getting a sugar pill, and we shouldn't even be like, maybe it's immoral to do double-blind studies.
Well, double-blind studies on unique and novel things make sense. But this is not unique nor novel. It's been around long. Well, unique, yes, but
my claim is if it actually works, you shouldn't need to do a double-blind study at all. But and then my hope was that MDMA, psychedelics, all these things, they were a hack on the double-blind study because you knew whether you got the real thing or the sugar pill, and so this would be a way to hack through this ridiculous double-blind criterion and just get the study done. And then what I think part of it is probably just an anti-drug ideology by the FDA, but the other part that happened on the sort of scientific establishment level is they think you need a double-blind study. Joe, we know you're hacking this double-blind study because people will know whether they got the sugar pill or not. And that's why we're going to arbitrarily change the goalposts and set them at way, way harder, because we know there's no way you can do a double-blind study, and if it's not a double-blind study, it's no good, because that's what our ideology of science tells us. And that's sort of...
I need something else to listen to right now. Damn, that's really bad. That is really bad.
An ally has been slain.
Welcome back. Be here long.
Why, fuck. Yeah, this is not going well. Yeah, it's good to know. I don't really know.
So many souls, so few bodies. A little longer, friend, then rest.
Yeah. I seem to read what her abilities do. Or his ability.
An ally has been slain. An enemy has been slain. An enemy is unstoppable.
She's so fast. What the fuck? What the fuck? Oh my god. Ugh.
Enemy rampage.
Dude, it takes like nothing for the. Oh, she has 5 kills, or he has. I don't. They have 5 kills.
There will be no requiem. Not yet.
I don't know what to do. Get in the VC.
What a beautiful dream is life.
Oh my god, dude. Fuck. Come on. My wife's already dead? Oh my god.
Respect to the dying.
It's actually so stupid. Yeah, so we just surrender. Let's get out of this game. That's such a dumb thing for this champion, dude. Just like you give up? Like that's fucking stupid. Like, I'm not saying you're stupid, I'm just saying it's like...
I do not know what lies beyond.
It's like you just can't come back? Like that's so cringe.
Death is not always a release.
Yep.
Your turret has been destroyed.
Don't bury me with it. You can't take it.
Well, her tool was...
An enemy is godlike.
I don't know. It's fucking stupid.
To dirt you return.
I mean, it's not though, because it's like, that's early game, right? And just snowballs from there? Like, that's crazy. Like, it can't be just like, oh, you turn into a hard carry because you won the early game, right? Like, they're just champs that should fall off
Shut down.
as the different parts of the game.
I must dig.
6 seconds, 5 seconds, 4 seconds. I dead? No. Gotta make sure. I should just turn. Oh my god.
An enemy is dominating. Shut down. Your team has destroyed a turret.
The beyond is not given, it is earned.
Wait, so they already got Baron? That's fucking hilarious. Because Kale? Like, that's so stupid.
An ally has been slain. Your team has destroyed a turret.
We go.
An ally has been slain.
The Isles remember. I cling to life by the thinnest thread. This horde consumes.
Kale's backing. Get out of here.
Your team has destroyed a turret.
Everything that stands must fall.
Go for the eyes.
I'm good, Quinn. No, Quinn, I'm good.